and he is the one who started GNU. Okay. Now today, if you type GNU in this one, it will come up with GNU operating system free software movement. Now, what is the story? And here you see a bison. Yeah, that is a symbol for GNU. Now, even without knowing, each one of you is using GNU today. So, in what way? Whenever so the story goes like this. Initially, there was one operating system called Unix. There was a experimental operating system in MIT called Multics, and AT&T Bell Labs. The researchers in AT&T Bell Labs created a, a operating system for a system called PDP-11, just like we call today x86 or x86 underscore 64 or something like that. The architecture for that machine was PDP-11. They created an operating system for PDP-11, and as a funny thing, they said, okay, instead of Multics, we have Unix, and that is how Unix was created. And Unix became very popular. Unix became so popular that AT&T Bell Labs was a public corporation. So they decided that we need copyright. That was the first use of copyright. Copyright for license for software. So what is copyright for software? So here, this is the thing about free and open source software. First of all, we have to understand what is copyright for software. Now, there is something which is specific to software, which is not the same as hardware. What is the difference between software and hardware? In terms of value or in terms of production, what is the specific thing about software that is not the case with hardware? Any idea? It's something which you do when you submit assignments. Anybody?
Copy.
You can copy. Yeah, you can copy for free, and it doesn't reduce any value of the thing which you copy from. It can be freely copied. Now, there is an old theory in economics which says that the value of a thing is actually the amount of socially necessary labor time involved in producing that. Yeah, that's called labor theory of value. That means air doesn't have any value, even though it is essential for our life, because it is free. You don't have to expend any human labor to produce it. But on the other hand, there are luxury items, even though it when technology improves, something's value dramatically drops because the amount of human effort which goes into it dramatically reduces. Yeah, that's something which you see today. Our mobile phones are much cheaper than let's say buying a car or something like that. Even though a car is a very old technology, but a mobile phone is much more complex technology. But still, the mobile phone is much cheaper than a car. The reason is you still have to put a lot of human labor goes into the production of a car than a mobile phone. Yeah, because large part of it is automated. So if you think in that sense that the value of anything is actually the human effort, this thing makes a difference, because you make some software, but then it can be infinitely copied. So then the value of something is actually you take the total labor time which goes into the production of the software, you divide it by the number of things you produce, which is pretty much infinity, because you can use as much as you want. So any amount of effort divided by an infinite copies of software reduces the value of software to zero. Yeah, so that's the idea. So therefore, when AT&T copyrighted Unix, what they copyrighted was that modifying, distributing. These are the two things which they ban. Not allowed to modify, not allowed to distribute. This is what happens in when you produce movies also. Yeah, they say you cannot redistribute, because if you redistribute, then it's nobody will come to see the movie. Similarly, if you can modify, then you will always modify and produce a better copy and you sell it. So therefore, copyrights for software, most of the proprietary software licenses disallow you to modify or distribute the software. Now there are very few proprietary softwares left in now. Microsoft Windows is one. There are some proprietary software are there. For instance, can you name me another proprietary software which you are not allowed to modify or redistribute? Any software which they ban you to distribute? Any critical software, or any mechanical students here? Okay, some comments in the chat. Mac OS, yes. Microsoft Office. Microsoft Office is one. But most software which requires specific which are specific uses, like Adobe Photoshop, or most of the Adobe products, Adobe, Adobe Photoshop, Adobe Illustrator. It's called something else these days. InDesign, then the movie editing software. A lot of them are copyrighted. That means you are not allowed to redistribute. Similarly, is the case with games. Most of the games you are not allowed to redistribute. These are proprietary software. They will have their own separate proprietary license, which prohibit you from modifying and redistributing. Okay, so now let's come back to our story. So Unix was the first software, first important software to be put in copyright, and then people in MIT didn't like it. In fact, most people in the universities didn't like, because Unix was created by academicians or researchers, and it was important for us to study. Even today, we learn be it shell programming, or be it operating system, or be it compilers. We still inherit a lot of stuff from Unix world. For instance, the C programming language. C programming language was designed to write Unix, the Unix operating system. The C compiler was created to compile the C programs which was used to create the Unix system. Most of the shell utilities, or sed, all these things were programs which are run on the Unix system. Today's operating system like Linux or Mac OS, these are, or there are other operating systems like FreeBSD, Solaris. All these are derivatives of Unix. Because Unix was copyrighted, people had to find alternatives for Unix. So people wrote clones. They satisfy exactly the same APIs. You know what is API? The interface which you use to program. So even though the internal mechanics will be different, to the outside it will look as a Unix system. So there were lots of versions of Unix, and this guy called Richard Stallman said, this is not fine. We need to have software should be distributed freely. Now, what is that free? Free as in freedom, not as in free lunch. Yeah. So it doesn't mean that you get it for free. What it means is, if you get a software, you should be able to modify and you should be able to redistribute. That is the essential freedom which is encapsulated in free and open source software. This free. And sometimes they use libre, the word libre. For instance, you might have heard LibreOffice. Yeah. So instead of the word, sometimes they use Libre is used. Libre means is the French root for freedom, liberty. Yeah. So the free software, when we talk about free software, we mean free as in freedom, not as in freelance. Yeah, because there are software which can ideally the people who distribute it can charge you for the service. There are a lot of companies which install the same software, but they charge you money for maintaining the system. Okay, they are not charging for the software, but they will charge for maintaining the system. For instance, most of the world's web servers run in something called LAMP. So LAMP stands for Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. Yeah, there are a lot of servers which run on these four technologies. Linux for the operating system. Apache is the world's leading web server. Most of the web servers you see will be running either Apache or HTTPD or things like that. And MySQL will be the database, and PHP will be the server-side scripting language. So there are a lot of servers like this. And all these software are open source. Actually, we see Linux, we already see the license for Linux. License for Linux is GPL, and Apache license is the original license in which Apache web server was distributed. That's why it's called Apache license. Yeah, when we talked about Apache 2 for user space, the Android operating system comes with two licenses. The user space programs are distributed with the license Apache 2, and the kernel part of the operating system is distributed with the GNU public license. So those two licenses are the licenses which come with Linux and Apache. For instance, if you just search for GPL, it will show GNU General Public License. Okay, so this is the license, and you can actually go through this one. This is what you copy to your the header of your source file, and it comes with a lot of rights. Okay, this is what is GNU General Public License. If you search for Apache license, Apache license version 2.0, this is the Apache 2 license. Yeah, and this is what you copy to your source code. Okay, so then so let me continue my story. So the GNU operating system was started by Richard Stallman because he liked the idea, and he started something called Free Software Foundation. And the purpose of the Free Software Foundation was to, is it my time? Is it why you called me? I'll just finish it.
Yeah, sure.
I'll just finish it in 5 minutes, okay? So then the Free Software Foundation was created by Richard Stallman, and the foundation's primary job was to create an operating system which was free to modify and distribute. And they created all the tools. For instance, they created the compilers, they created the shell tools, all which are needed to create the operating system, the libraries and so on. For instance, today when we compile using GCC stands for GNU Compiler Collection. That's a large compiler which can compile a lot of languages like C, Java, Python, all these languages. It has a lot of front ends. And so GCC was started by Free Software Foundation. glibc, the C library, or the shell tools, shell programming tools, the bash, all these things were created by Free Software Foundation. But they were lacking one thing, and what they were lacking was the major component of the operating system, which was called the kernel. And that kernel went on because they were trying to create an advanced operating system which was multi-threaded. It's called microkernel. What is special about that is usually operating systems till that day, including Unix, was a one big program. And the consensus at that time was that one big program is not very effective because it might fail. So we might actually, if we actually create an operating system into smaller pieces, smaller independent programs which communicate with each other and which each do their own individual portions, that is called microkernel. It's a multi-threaded operating system with a lot of processes running which communicate with each other, and it's an advanced concept. So then they decided, okay, we will start a microkernel, but that process never finished. It went on forever. And in the meantime, a Finnish student called Linus Torvalds created a clone of Unix for his x86 machine, 386 machine, and that caught on. It was in 1992 or early 90s. And that caught on, and Linux became very popular because a lot of people started migrating. There was an operating system before that called Minix, and because that was also copyrighted, that's why Linux caught on with the Minix users, and pretty much it became very usable. And most of the original plan to finish the GNU hard kernel, which was the kernel which was meant for GNU, it didn't succeed. So it was abandoned, and Linux was taken as the kernel for the GNU operating system. Today we call the operating system Linux, even though Free Software Foundation people would say that it's not actually correct to call it Linux because Linux is just a kernel. The operating system is GNU/Linux. Similarly, the operating system Android should be Android/Linux because Android is operating system on which you run things. Linux is the kernel. Yeah. So then Linux success the Microsoft Corporation and Navigator. So there was a browser called Internet Explorer, and there was a browser called Netscape Navigator. So to check the growth of Netscape Navigator, Microsoft did one thing. They actually started breaking. They started packing their own Internet Explorer with the Windows operating system, and they also started breaking the standards, the HTML standards, so that Netscape Navigator will not be able to display correctly the websites by Microsoft servers. So they were doing unhealthy practices, which you see all the time. Yeah, because when corporations wants to take advantage, they start breaking standards. They don't stick to standards. They break it to make undue advantage. So as a challenge, Netscape Navigator started they decided to go open source, and Netscape Navigator came as open source, and they called their project Mozilla. And then this was the beginning of 2000s, and then in 10 years, the internet revolution happened. Lots and lots of things started coming as open source. Today, if you look at, and in the late 2010, that time, the GitHub revolution started. And today, if you look, most software which are used by most people are open source. Okay, and this is actually the power of open source, because open source encourages large collaboration. It actually enables easy detection of errors, problems, fixes, security threats, all these things are easily fixed in the case of open source, because as soon as somebody spot something, it can be fixed. A new update can be released. It can be updated by everybody, and the innovation in one technology can percolate very dramatically to other areas and so on. In the case of open source, so the future is open source. But again, like I said before, there are some niche products for which there is a market for non-proprietary software. For instance, a software which takes a lot of, remember why software's value tends to zero? It is because even though it takes a large amount of work and cooperation to build the software, the number of copies, when you divide it, its value tends to zero. That's the reason why it goes to open source. But if the number of users are not that much, like if there are, if for instance in the case of Photoshop, or in the case of movie editing software and so on, not that many users. So therefore, if you have a large amount of investment divided by sufficiently large number of users, it implies there is still a value. So then in that case, there is a case for proprietary software, and they will always be proprietary software. But the trend and the direction and the natural law of software is to become free, and it should be free. So some other time we should talk about the idea of promoting free software, participating in development of free software, and the development of free software culture in campus. So when, for instance, force clubs, the introducing people to the free software world, installation, things like that, we should have at some point, but today we don't have time for that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. And we got to learn a lot about open source, and especially about copyright laws and how software is generally divided and why open source is so great. Thank you for that. So now we will be continuing with our presentation. Yeah. So our main, am I audible?
Yes, Karthik, you're audible.
Okay. Yeah, moving on. First of all, let's can someone identify what which organization's logo or mascot this is? I guess this should be easy. They have been well acquainted. Anyone? Can anyone speak? Because I can't read the chat. So. Okay, so this is the mascot of Linux, like as in the organization which makes many of the open source software, and it is the backbone of open source, to be honest. And what you will be expecting through this info, yeah. There was someone saying anything? Yes. Okay, moving on. The main aim of this info session is to get you started with Hacktober Fest in particular, but also about open source and why should you try to contribute and be a part of this vibrant and enthusiastic community.
So guys, let's get an idea of what you think an open source is, the advantages, the disadvantages. Let's see what you guys have to say on this. Anyone who has any ideas or like has any experience in open source or any contributions? Like you can type in the chat also, it's not an issue if you don't want to speak, but it would be better if you speak.
Yeah, so hello, am I audible?
You're audible.
Yeah.
Yeah, so open source, contributing in open source improves our programming skills and debugging skills, I guess.
Yeah,
That's
that's true to an extent. Anyone else? What does open source mean to you?
like it doesn't need to be only like you speak of any disadvantages if you can find in open source. You just don't need to praise it. You just need to participate and contribute. The main idea of the fest is to contribute. So I think it would be better if you all just participate.
Hello.
Yes, Anish.
Yeah, yeah. So, like, if we want to make some software, we can open source it and get others to help, get
Yeah.
collaborators from
Mm,
around the world using GitHub and other stuff. And
that's true.
yeah, and because it's open and free, people can use it freely.
That's great. Like, have you, Anish, do you have any experience in like any of this stuff? Have you tried
I
something?
have a GitHub account, but I have not contributed to other projects. I just work on mine.
Ah, no issues. It's good that you are familiar with GitHub. Anyone else?
Okay, so moving on. Uh, well, every answer, every single thing which you said was correct, because there is no right answer when it comes to open source. Each contribution has a separate meaning. Even though, like, let's say they wanted a feature, but you gave something else, maybe that can help them later on. So similarly, in that way, there is no proper definition of what open source should be. So yeah. Now moving on to Git, like Git and GitHub are the essence of open source. And why? Because Git is a version control system, which means that you can collaborate and as well as get back to previous versions of the same repository or project if you want to. Like, let's say you made an app, okay, and you are currently on version 1.2 where you implemented a camera feature, but let's say you see that there are some bugs which you cannot fix and you want, and the users need to get the app as soon as possible, maybe even without the camera. So what you can do is you can revert back to a previous version where you didn't add the camera and everything was stable. So in that way, Git is useful, and also it makes collaboration easier by pull request and merging.
Okay, so I'll share my screen from here.
Sure.
Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Cool. So you can install Git by finding a lot of tutorials, and I'll put one of them in the chat for you as well. Right. So you can go through a lot of tutorials like these, and so after installing Git, you can check your version using this command, git dash dash version, and your output should look something like this. Now you can configure your Git on the command line using the two config commands shown here, and I already have mine configured, so I can check my details using this command, git config dash dash global dash dash list. Right. So once you have configured your Git, you can see your details like this as well. And now you're all set to use Git on the command line. So first thing that we're going to look at is the Git clone command. So you can clone a repository from GitHub into your local system using this command. It can be done using HTTPS or SSH or even the GitHub CLI. So for HTTPS, you can use personal access tokens. And if you want to authenticate only once, you can use SSH. You can find the documentation to authenticate with SSH by Googling. Here, I'll show you, demonstrate this command with HTTPS. Okay, so let's find a repository to clone. So here you can find the link, HTTPS, SSH, or even the GitHub CLI command, whichever way you want to use to clone this repository. Go to your terminal. It asks for your username. And then in place of the password here, you have to put your personal access token. This process can vary for different platforms like GitLab, Bitbucket, or GitHub. But on GitHub, they've recently changed it from password to PATs. Now, you can generate these PATs from your profile on GitHub in the developer settings. Now, the next thing is the Git Init command. So you can put your local directories on Git using the Git Init command. It also requires you to add the path to your remote directory using the Git remote add command, but I'm going to skim through this part very quickly as most probably you're not going to need this for the Hacktober Fest. But I encourage you to go through these things and explore more of this on your own. Then we have the Git add command. So I just showed you that I cloned a repository. Let's move into this repository. It has a readme, so I'll edit this. Now you want to put your changes on the staging area. That really just means saving your changes. And that's what the git command is used for. Now you have your changes in the staging area. And you can also check the status with the git status command. And it tells you that you have modified this file. And these are the changes that need to be committed. So the next command is the git commit command. And that's what we're going to use to commit these changes. The flag -m is really useful as it can tell you what were the changes made with this specific commit. So in case you want to revert to a specific version, you can see where was a specific feature added or where was a specific change made, and you can straight away revert to that. So let's just say I added my name. Okay, now the next commands are the git push and the git pull command. So the git push command pushes your changes, and the git pull command helps you pull those changes into your local repository, a local directory on your system. So we'll push these changes. And again, it will ask for your username and the PAT. And now the changes have been pushed. And similarly, if a change was made from the GUI, for example, so here I've added some changes from the GUI, and now if I want to pull those changes into my local repository, I'll use the git pull command. Now let's check if, yes, so I can see these changes in my local directory now. Moving on. So now let's see how you can make a contribution during this fest and generally as well. So first what you do is you fork a repository that you want to make changes to. So right now I'm just going to use a demo repository made by Karthikeya. So this I have already forked. Yes, so you can fork using this option here. So this is a feature of the GitHub platform and not Git. So you cannot do this from the command line. This is something that you can only do from the GUI of GitHub. So I already have this repository forked. And then we need to clone this to our local system to make the changes. And again, we'll follow the same process as I showed you when I was demonstrating the basic commands of GitHub. Right. And then we need to create a branch using this command that you can see here, git checkout dash b and the branch name. So let's call this branch Hacktober, okay, HF info session demo. Okay, now we have switched to the new branch. So we're making this branch because there are probably going to be a lot of changes that are made while you're still working on the changes that you were targeting, and you don't want to disturb anything in the main branch. So that is why you do your own, like the specific changes or the specific work that you were targeting in another branch when you're working in a repository where a lot of other people are collaborating. Now you can make the required changes. So let's see what we have here. Okay. We have a README here as well. Hacktober Fest info session. Let's just say this is for demo PR. Now, again, you're going to do this, follow the same steps as I showed you during the basic commands. Let's see the status. So Git is very forgivable when it comes to command line. It gives you a lot of instructions when it senses that you're doing something wrong somewhere. So it tells you that the changes have not been sent to the staging area. So we have to use the git add command. And one more advantage of using the GitHub CLI, like the Git CLI, is that if you run a wrong command, so let's say I just say git add and do not specify a file or anything. So it gives you some hints to help you do it the right way. So we'll just run the command git add dot. Now our changes have been sent to the staging area. And again, we'll commit these changes. Made demo change. So the changes have been committed. And now instead of using the git push command, we're going to use this command here, git push dash dash set upstream and remote. The remote is origin and our branch name was HF info session demo. Mm, Did I make a spelling mistake or something? Okay, there is an error here. So let me just run these commands in my home directory as well. This is basically the same thing I'm doing. I think that error might be because I was doing it in another GitHub directory.
Yeah, there was a different git and yeah, that's
Yeah. There are a lot of unexpected errors you face sometimes with the Git CLI, and most of those are usually Googleable. And you also learn a lot when you Google a lot of things, rather than just asking people. So I recommend you to explore things on your own as well. So following the same steps again. Mm, yeah. Yeah, so now I have committed the changes that I wanted to make. And now let's go to the directory. And yeah, here it shows us this notification that our branch had recent pushes less than a minute ago. So we can just click on compare and pull request here. And there is an option of creating a pull request, and click here. And we have
Yeah.
already created a pull request. Now here it says this branch has no conflicts with the base branch. So usually when working in big repositories and collaborating with a huge amount of people, you're bound to face some merge conflicts as well. So since that is like a huge topic and a lot to cover in a 1 hour session, so we're not going to go into depth with that, but they are again usually Googleable and they're really unexpected. So even if we try to, we probably cannot cover it all. So we're just going to leave you to think about that for yourself.
Yeah.
And that's it from
Also,
my side.
yeah. Also, can you go to that slide again? Like, PR on the link, not slide. Sorry, the page. Yeah. So now here, what happened is that she actually let's say you are contributing to an organization, and generally you don't have right access, that you cannot change their repositories by themselves, and there will be maintainers or owners of the repositories who will be doing so. So for example here, like she created a pull request into my repository. So now what I can do is, like, if I see that, yeah, it's a significant contribution or it's a valid one, then I can choose to merge this PR, and let's say I merge this PR now. Now then it will show that Kartikeya has merged, and then she can either delete the branch in which she worked, or she can keep continuing to contribute in the organization. So yeah, that's the overall. The cycle is complete here in a sense.
Yeah. So just a general advice. Big repositories usually have readmes and markdown files called contributing.md or something, where they specify the pull request formats, or maybe something specific that they require in their pull request. So you're recommended to go through them so that you do not create conflicts with their guidelines. And usually, this is also not recommended, no description provided. It is always good to have a description of what you're doing, or what change you're making, or what change you're creating a pull request for, so that people can see this description and get a hold of your change, and they don't have to go through the whole code. And you have to take care of these small things in the open source community, and it's a very good community, and they're generally very forgiving. Just take care of these small things. And I don't think we can cover a lot of this during this 1 hour session, but yeah, so open source is all about learning and community. So do Google these things, and tell others as well if you find something new.
Okay, so moving on, we will now just give you a brief introduction of what Hacktober Fest really is. Like, what can you accept when you what can you expect when you're contributing to Hacktober Fest? So Akshay,
So as you can see, Hacktober Fest is a month-long celebration of open source software. Maintainers are invited to guide would-be contributors, that would be you, towards issues that will help move the project forwards. Also, to encourage most of you, t-shirts for submitting 4 pull requests during the fest for the first 70,000 participants will be provided by the sponsors. Here are some of the rules of the Hacktober Fest that you have to follow. The pull request must be made on the GitHub platform. Only pull requests will be count. You can't just have any push request or anything that won't be added to your count of that won't be considered. Any pull request made on the public repository will be counted. And make sure that the pull requests that you make are not a spam or irrelevant. Those will not be counted as and considered for your evaluation.
Yeah, adding here, like, what do we mean by irrelevant is that, let's say, you made a pull request of, let's say, you're changing a sentence in a repository. Now that may seem like, yeah, for you it's great, but for overall, like, as a contributor or as a maintainer, nobody wants to see that you're just changing a single word, and that means that you have contributed to their repository. So these are generally irrelevant, or they will be labeled as invalid by them, and then they wouldn't be counted towards your progress in the Hacktober Fest. Now, how do you find a way to contribute? So it's majorly about what projects you choose, and like, initially search for project issues which are labeled as good first issues. Now these are the ones which are provided by them, which means that they are encouraging us to start contributing to their repositories through minor changes. So, and finding, and I'll share this link in the chat soon, where you can find the issues according to your language or your preferences. Like, let's say you want to work on documentation, or you want to work on web development or app development, then you can find specific issues there. Okay, so I'd like to show you one last thing before we conclude. That is the Hacktoberfest website, and actually what how you will proceed. So now, first, when you will write Hacktoberfest, you go to the website, and then you need to click on this Start Hacking, which will take you to your account, where you will first log in, and then you can start contributing. Like, I have logged in, so for me, like, my goal is shown that I need to complete 4 pull requests, like these symbols, these flowers or whatever. Yeah, so we need to complete 4 pull requests, but I haven't made any of them yet. So let's say if I made a SAMI contribution somewhere, then even though initially it will be counted that here one pull request would be there, but during the course of there's like a 2-week cooldown period, okay, where they will check whether your pull request is valid or not, and then my pull request would be labeled invalid if found so. So it's generally not a good idea to, like, create pull requests that may be insignificant, or you are spamming their repositories continuously. So yeah, and yeah, like, you can get started, and then it will take you to your GitHub, and then you can search for repositories, like whatever you want, like, for, yeah. So that's pretty much it about what you guys would be doing in Hacktoberfest. You will be searching for your uh, interested organizations, or where you want to contribute, and you will be contributing to them. It's up to you till when you want to contribute it. Like, ideally, if you are interested, genuinely interested, then of course you should continue. And especially for this Hacktoberfest month, I believe your emphasis should be on open source only. That you get to learn more, and you get to explore it deeper and delve deeper into the community. So yeah. Also, yeah, one more thing. Actually, apart from Hacktoberfest, also there are many events that happen generally, which include the MLH Fellowship, which is a major league hacking. This is an organization which organizes drives and workshops regularly. So you can visit their website. I'll be sharing them soon, and then everyone knows about Gsoc, I'm sure. And if you don't, I would be let's give you a short intro of, like, it's basically a program where Google sponsors your contributions, where you work with your favorite organization and Google provides you a stipend for working with them, and you need to work on specific projects which you find interesting, and you contribute to it over a course of 3 months, 3 to 4 months. Earlier it was 6 to 8 months, but they reduced it by half now, like since last year. And this is very prestigious. Like if someone cracks this, it's great. So I would say that aim for this and initially start working on Hacktober Fest and get started. So yeah, and also tell your friends to do so too. Does anyone have any doubts or anything regarding GitHub or Hacktober Fest or open source in general? Who will review the PRs? It depends. Like let's say there's an organization which is quite large. Like let's say there are 20 to 30 people. Then there will be maintainers on them who will maintain specific repositories. Like let's say there's FOSS-SCI. It's an organization. It's an open source organization. They have many repositories ranging from backend to front end to web development, many stuff. So for each of them, the owner wouldn't be responsible for checking them. Like there would be maintainers who would be flagging your PRs as merged, or whether they are invalid or whether it's okay. Like let's say they wanted different approach, but you provided a different approach. Then, as I said earlier, like there's nothing wrong. Like there's no right or wrong answer in open source. It will either be useful now or it will be useful later. So yeah. Anyone else?
I want to know that do we have to contribute in some ongoing project, a big project, or some like small one is also fine, which like
No, yeah, there are no restrictions as such that you need to participate in a quite large project or something. It just needs to be genuine contribution. Like it can even be a project which is being done with your friends, but it needs to be genuine. Like so, yeah.
okay.
Okay. Also, before you leave, we would be creating like a sample repository on the GoMyno student organization page on GitHub, and I'll be sharing the link, and I guess your friends, others, or someone will share them in your groups, and you can start practicing on how to make pull requests. Like there's nothing to be ashamed of if you're starting, and I guess that will help you in Hacktober Fest. So we'll be creating that today, and you can start working on it as well as researching more about Hacktober Fest if you would like to. Well, I guess there are no more doubts. If there are, then you can either ping me or ping Sejal or ping Akshay. So, yeah, thank you for joining us and have a great evening.